From its story to its side missions to its random encounters and beyond, Red Dead Redemption 2 truly has no shortage of interesting content, and behind it all some interesting historical references. And as far as random encounters are concerned, we're almost done, at least for now, with a few more locations to visit and a few more characters left to meet. So let's take a look at the real history of Red Dead Redemption 2. Arthur previously met a con man in Saint Denis trying to sell his get-rich-quick book. Much further west in Strawberry is another alleged con man.
This damn con man sold me a serum made from rhino horn for a little problem I've been having.
This is a believable scam, as it's believed Chinese medicine has used rhino horns for over 2,000 years, including for disorders like fever, gout, and rheumatism. The belief that it was prescribed as an aphrodisiac, however, appears to be a misinterpretation or misunderstanding by Western media, but that hasn't stopped it from catching on, including in recent years, leading to increased interest in rhino horns. Elsewhere in Strawberry, Arthur encounters the mayor, who is doing his best to promote the town's image to those around him.
Temperance, diligence, forbearance shall make for a happy land here.
These are essentially 3 of the 7 virtues, the opposite of the 7 deadly sins. Temperance, which opposes gluttony, diligence, the opposite of sloth, and forbearance, which is essentially patience, the opposite of wrath. These are based on the revision by Pope Gregory I around 590 AD.
By living in peace and harmony, we are building a great Jerusalem.
Historically, comparing one's town or city to Jerusalem is a logical promotion method. Jerusalem is sacred to several religions. It is the holiest city in Judaism, considered the homeland of the Jewish people since the 10th century BC. It's considered the cradle of Christianity, the city where Jesus was brought after his birth, and the home of the most important church in Christendom, where Jesus was crucified, buried, and later resurrected. It is the 3rd holiest city in Sunni Islam, where Muhammad was transported during his night journey. It is also believed by Mandaeans to be the birthplace of their chief prophet, John the Baptist.
A new Athens in the mountains!
This is also a logical comment. Athens is one of the world's oldest cities, the oldest capital in Europe, with recorded history beginning in at least 1600 BC, and it is often regarded the birthplace of democracy and the cradle of Western civilization.
It's a magnificent little community we are building here. Almost Tolstoyan, if you know what that means.
I don't.
Well, neither do I.
As the name suggests, this is a social movement based on the views of Leo Tolstoy, a Russian novelist who lived in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Its followers generally identify as Christians, but opt specifically to follow Jesus' teachings rather than his divine nature. They prefer a simple lifestyle, avoiding meat, alcohol, smoking, and sex, and preferring pacifism and non-violence. It's known to have inspired Mahatma Gandhi, and thought to have had an influence on Martin Luther King Jr. and Cesar Chavez. Northeast of Strawberry, Arthur can find and assist a logging camp run by the Appleseed Timber Company. The company is possibly named after Johnny Appleseed, named as such for his introduction of apple trees to large parts of the United States and Canada. He was said to have radiated a spirit of peacefulness that led to him becoming a bit of an American legend. There were several companies similar to the Appleseed Timber Company operating around this time, though lumber company seemed more common. Some were named after the area, like the Atlantic, Pacific, and Oregon lumber companies, and several were named after their founders, like the Babcock or Long Bell lumber companies. All of these were founded between the 1860s and 1890s, so Appleseed's existence is entirely unsurprising. Back over in the east, just outside of Saint Denis, Arthur encounters a man with an infected arm, and takes him to the doctor to get it amputated. We discussed this earlier in regards to Hamish Sinclair, but amputations like this were not uncommon during the Civil War. Contrary to some belief though, anaesthetic was used. During the Civil War, only around 254 of more than 80,000 surgeries were performed without general anaesthesia, approximately 0.3%. Chloroform was the most popular, being used in more than 70% of all surgeries in the North during the war. As shown in the game too, bone saws were used, leading to the nickname sawbones for surgeons during the war. It wasn't quite as basic as depicted in the game though. There was a lot more work done with the blood vessels, arteries, nerves, and bones, rather than simply cutting straight through and wrapping in a bandage as done in the game. Further north in Annesburg, Arthur meets a scientist named Dr. Malcolm McIntosh trying to spread his message on the state of the world.
The land will boil. The sea will dry up. The world will heat. Crops shall wither.
Historically, he's not wrong. Since the Industrial Revolution, the average surface air temperature of the Earth has increased by almost 1.5 degrees Celsius, around 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit. This has an impact on the global sea levels, which have risen almost 10 inches since 1880. Though importantly, as Dr. McIntosh suggests, increased carbon levels could see the ocean eventually evaporate, as evidenced by the receding shoreline of the Dead Sea. As for withering crops, some crops will be negatively impacted by climate change, like corn, whose crop yields are projected to decline by around 24% by 2030, though others are expected to perform a little better as a result. Wheat yield could grow by around 17%. When Arthur revisits Dr. McIntosh, he shares one of his ideas for his next books.
I've got a great bit about how this new craze for dental hygiene will make our pets homosexual.
Huh.
Bizarrely, this may not be a creation of the game's writers. There is a chemical compound that can be found in some dental fillings called bisphenol A. Bisphenol A is a xenoestrogen, a type of xenohormone that imitates estrogen. Such endocrine-disrupting chemical pollutants were, according to a conspiracy theory that started in the 2010s, causing frogs in the US to become homosexual, though this was primarily in relation to atrazine, a herbicide used to control weeds, not a dental product. Across the tracks in Annesburg, Arthur encounters a couple arguing.
I don't want you to work in that mine no more, okay?
Her concerns about the safety of the mine are unfortunately not unfounded. There were several mining accidents before this, and many in the years to come, like in May 1902, when at least 216 miners died in Freighterville, Tennessee, or January 1904, when 179 miners and 2 aid workers died in Cheswick, Pennsylvania. December 1907, when 362 miners died in Monongah, West Virginia, and 239 men and boys in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania. November 1908, 154 men in Marianna, Pennsylvania. And November 1909, 259 men and boys in Cherry, Illinois, alongside several others. A little south of Annesburg, in Van Horn, Arthur encounters a drunk man singing a beautiful tune.
A Yankee ship came down the river. Blow, boys, blow.
This song is also performed by Shawn and Pearson at the gang's camp. It's sometimes called Blow Boys Blow, or a Yankee ship. Earlier versions seem to originate around 1813, referring to the slave trade, though the lyrics of later adaptations seem to refer to the American Civil War. North of Annesburg, Arthur stumbles across a tent containing a man crying out for help.
Help me! The pox!
This could refer to several diseases with the suffix pox. There are dozens. Perhaps the most well known is smallpox, which would also be the most likely in this time and place. The last major smallpox epidemic in the United States was in Boston from 1901 to 1903, which saw 300 people die out of almost 1,600 cases. Also in this area, Arthur encounters a man who was naked and howling, like his wolf friends. While this man was a bit older when he chose this lifestyle, there are several examples of so-called feral children who were raised by animals, including wolves, like Dina Sanichar, who was found in a cave with wolves in India in 1867 at the age of 6, and Marcos Rodriguez Pantoja, who was abandoned as a 7-year-old in 1953 and discovered at 19 in 1965. In a slightly different but equally fascinating story, a Vietnamese man took his youngest son into the jungle to flee the Vietnam War in 1973. They lived there in isolation in a treehouse. The son only knew a few words of the local Khor dialect. They were ultimately discovered 4 decades later, in 2013. The father died in 2017 at the age of 86, and the son of liver cancer in 2021 at 52. In several locations in the game, Arthur can encounter a man who is dubbed the Mad Preacher. There are likely several real-life figures who may fit this description, but one interesting man is Lorenzo Dow, an American preacher who was given the nickname Crazy Dow. He valued his nickname and felt it helped in bringing in larger congregations. His methods were apparently unconventional, but he was said to have preached to more people, traveled more miles, and consistently attracted larger audiences to camp meetings than any preacher of his day. He and his wife would often not wash for some time and would wear clothes until they fell apart, embracing poverty for the sake of gospel. He was said to have cursed the town of Jacksonboro, Georgia, for attacking him in opposition of his sermon, except for Seaborn Goodall, who had rescued him. The town subsequently fell apart with winds, fires, and floods, except for Goodall's house. In the hills of Roanoke Ridge, Arthur encounters a man who thinks he's still in the Civil War.
Captain Hayden Russell, 29th Ambarino Volunteer Infantry.
This name matches that of several infantry regiments who served during the Civil War, like the 29th Regiment Illinois Volunteer Infantry and the 29th Indiana Volunteer Infantry Regiment.
We will move on Lemoyne soon and take Saint Denis from the rebels.
You do know what year it is, right?
What kind of question's that? 1862, April 14th.
This is 4 days before the start of the Battle of Forts Jackson and St. Philip in Louisiana, which led to the capture of New Orleans by May 1st, so it seems a similar battle occurred in Lemoyne and Saint Denis in the game's history.
Now move along, civilian, and watch yourself. Johnny Reb's in the area.
Johnny Rebs was the personification of Confederate soldiers and the nickname given to Confederate soldiers, sometimes by Union soldiers across the picket line. It's the counterpart to Billy Yank, the personification of the Union soldier derived from the nickname Yankee. In one fairly brief but annoying encounter, a man approaches Arthur asking for some help, and then promptly steals his horse. Horse thievery was not uncommon in the Old West, but it was certainly frowned upon. It's said there was a saying that if you stole a man's horse, you would condemn him to death. In 1780, Pennsylvania passed a law demanding a tiered punishment for horse thieves. First-time offenders had to stand in the pillory for an hour, had their bare backs whipped 39 times, and had their ears cut off. Second-time offenders were again whipped and had their forehead branded with the letters HT, horse thief. This law was repealed in 1860. Horse thievery became rampant enough in this time that several organizations were established to prevent it, like the Society in Dedham for Apprehending Horse Thieves, founded around 1810 in Massachusetts, and the Bentonville Anti-Horse Thief Society, founded in 1853 in Ohio. Missouri's Anti-Horse Thief Association, founded in 1854, had over 40,000 members in 9 states. In Oklahoma between 1899 and 1901, the association caught over 400 suspected thieves, saw 272 of them convicted, and recovered $83,000 worth of livestock. Much further southwest in the game is the town of Armadillo, where you'll find a man warning people to leave.
Hey, friend. Place is full of cholera. Head in there at your own peril. Well, half the town has died, and most of the rest have fled.
This isn't entirely out of place, though it is a little later than one might expect. There was a major cholera outbreak in the United States in the mid-19th century, which impacted several major cities. St. Louis, Missouri lost more than 4,500 people, while Cincinnati, Ohio lost almost 6,000. Several small towns in the Midwest were also severely impacted, largely in Indiana. Aurora, Indiana had a population of 2,000 in 1849, of whom 1,600 fled and 122 died from cholera. Similar to Armadillo, the townspeople attempted to purify the air with fires at street crossings. Boston, Indiana had a population of 120 in 1849, of whom 53 died. The town was abandoned except for one family, and it's said that there was often no one left to bury the dead. Washington, Indiana had 1,000 people in 1849. 50 people died, and one paper said that only 5 families later remained. Salem, Indiana had a population of a few hundred in 1833, and there were 113 deaths in and around the town. The local newspaper stopped publication, and the local minister wrote that everyone fled except a donkey and a drunken grocery keeper. New Elizabeth, Indiana saw a mass exodus of 70 of the town's 75 families, after 10% of its population died. Amsterdam, Ohio was said to have existed from 1837 to 1849, when all of its residents died from cholera. The entire town ceased to exist, and its only remnant is a road named Amsterdam Road.
A few years ago it was the scarlet fever, then it was the desert plague, then typhus, now the cholera.
Some deaths in Amsterdam, Ohio were attributed to diseases like typhoid, malaria, and scarlet fever, and it would be unsurprising elsewhere too. There was a world pandemic of scarlet fever from around the 1820s to 1880s, and a US epidemic of typhus in the mid-1800s. The Armadillo Town Crier will give you a handbill from the New Austin Sanitary Committee, which matches the handbills distributed in the 1800s, like this one distributed in New York around the late 1840s.
Some folks say the whole town is cursed.
This theory could apply to a lot of towns in and out of the United States. One interesting example is Bodie, California, a boomtown which had around 8,000 residents in 1879. Its population subsequently declined, and it was declared a ghost town by 1915. It's said that the town is cursed, and that anybody who takes anything will themselves be cursed, though in truth, this curse was started by a park ranger who wanted to stop tourists from stealing objects from the area. Later in Armadillo, the player encounters an undertaker who is throwing dead bodies in a mass burial site. This was not uncommon. It was known as a cholera pit, of which there were several in Canada and the United Kingdom. There's a notable one at a church in Arbor, Indiana, a mass grave with some stones which was kept separate from the other graves there. A little further outside of Armadillo, near the church, is a man burning the bodies of dead cholera victims. This was apparently performed some time before this in Japan following other epidemics in the 1700s and 1800s, though it was often more for religious reasons, and on at least one occasion in the UK before the bodies were placed into a cholera pit. In the US, Swinburne Island and Hoffman Island were built to quarantine immigrants who arrived by ship carrying contagious diseases. Swinburne had a crematorium, which was used to cremate several bodies of those who died on the island, though this was likely for convenience and space. Some suggested that bodies of dead cholera victims should be burned to prevent further infection, though the disease is mostly spread through contaminated food and water. Back in Armadillo, the player can encounter 4 members of the Del Lobo gang threatening the sheriff, and can choose to help take them down.
I don't know what you made of that, but it was a close thing. And in light of that, and the sad demise of this settlement, I am resigning my post.
This isn't really close to the same situation, but it's almost reminiscent of the story of Harry Love, who was a deputy sheriff in Los Angeles. He later worked to pursue the 5 Joaquins, the gang on whom the Del Lobos may be based, and alongside his group, the California Rangers, he allegedly killed Joaquin Murrieta. After this, the Rangers disbanded, and Love tried to settle down near Boulder Creek, California. About 15 years later, he was killed by the bodyguard of his estranged wife when he showed up on her porch. In a different encounter with the Del Lobos, the player can hear them complaining about their sleeping quarters.
This is a little too cozy for all of us.
We were sleeping on top of each other when I was out fighting in the Caribbean.
There are several military conflicts that have taken place in or around the Caribbean. The most recent at this time was the Spanish-American War in 1898, which partly took place in Cuba and Puerto Rico in the Caribbean Sea. If this was the case, then his comments seem accurate. The living conditions for soldiers during the war were unsanitary and led to outbreaks of disease. In one more encounter with the Del Lobos, they cause some trouble in Armadillo.
To the north, you got the Rangers. To the south, Rhode Island.
This refers to armed government forces. From 1861 to 1914, this referred to the Rural Guard, essentially a police force. Interestingly, they're known as Federales in the first Red Dead Redemption, also set around this time, but this is the name commonly given to the Mexican army, not the Rural Guard, though it's likely just used as a catch-all for all law and military enforcement. Red Dead Redemption 2 is beautiful and vast and expansive. There is so much to see, so many characters to meet, and so many historical connections to find and discuss. It still feels like there are more individual elements of this game with deep historical references to discover and explore, and there is still plenty of time for that to be done. But for now, there are more stories to be told elsewhere in the Red Dead universe, more locations to find, people to meet, and history to uncover.